Let's begin this hour with the economy and how the price you pay for certain goods could be set to rise. That's after U.S. tariffs on Canadian, Mexican, and Chinese goods went into effect overnight.
The White House imposed a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada. Canada, though, also saw a 10% duty levied on its energy. China received an additional 10% tariff on its goods. Now, Canada and China have already announced retaliatory measures. Mexico is expected to follow suit later today. The trade war is already weighing on markets this morning. European and Asian stocks are currently trading lower, and U.S. stocks dipped on Monday. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung joining us to explain it all. Brian, good morning. So just give us more details on what's been announced so far and then the response we're seeing from trading partners.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, for consumers, the expectation here is that prices for nearly everything could go up here. And that's because China and Canada and Mexico are such major trade partners with the United States. Starting off with Canada and Mexico, our neighbors to the north and south, autos is kind of the big one there. So actually, there were some estimates out there from the likes of the Anderson Automotive Group that estimated that a new car could cost you as much as $12,000 more per car if you do try to buy as a result of these tariffs. That's because we bring in so many parts from Mexico. We assemble a lot of these cars entirely in Canada and then bring them back into the United States. Could be like a double tariff situation in some of those cases. But it's also things like produce, things that we shop for at the store when it comes to fruits and vegetables, which we bring in from Mexico, in addition to potatoes that come in from Canada. So food prices are likely going to go up as well as a result of this 25% increase. Again, if you're an importer in the United States, you have to pay that 25% tariff. Well, then in many cases, you'll pass that on to the consumer. That's the reason why we might expect inflation to actually go back up as a result of these actions.
Yeah, and we want to know what this means for consumers. And I guess one of the big questions is how quickly consumers might see the impact of all this.
Yeah, well, actually, it's so interesting because in some cases, we've already seen the price impacts here, even in anticipation of these tariffs actually taking effect at midnight. I remember talking to a auto body shop owner who said weeks ago that, he had already seen the prices of, for example, filters for auto car parts already rising in price because these suppliers were saying, I know that Trump is pretty serious about these tariffs. I'm just going to raise my price ahead of time. Now, call that price gouging, call that anticipation of these tariffs coming, call it what you will, but prices are going up. So consumers are in some cases already feeling the impact of that. But I want to point out here, guys, this is just the beginning of this trade war. When we talk about China, there was the 10% that was slapped on in the beginning of February. This is an additional 10% that was slapped on at midnight today. But this is the beginning because Trump promised as high as 60% tariffs on the campaign trail. You can imagine this is just kind of the beginning of this process.
Brian, you mentioned it's could be on just about anything you go to buy, but any tips to save money?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, for right now, when it comes to just trying to hedge against it, some tips for you: clipping coupons, shopping at your local farms and markets, and joining neighborhood trade and swap groups. The idea is that if you do buy local, in some cases, you could find some savings there, even if maybe there's a bit of an organic kind of premium to that. But look, at the end of the day, when it comes to just trying to hedge against all of this, there's only so much that you can do. So maybe try to take advantage of those memberships. Costco, for example, buy in bulk for some items. Don't try to hoard. That's not a good approach here because you don't want to spend too much for things that's going to just expire anyway when it comes to things like produce. But again, just try to stay on your toes and keep your head on a swivel.
We mentioned the stock market yesterday didn't perform terribly well. Is this perhaps short-term volatility, or should we be on the lookout for perhaps something more in the coming days?
Yeah, about a 2% drop in the stock market just yesterday, but it's been a pretty rough few weeks as these tariff talks have kind of ramped up. It's basically erased any of those 4 or 5% gains we had seen in the stock market to start off 2025. But when it comes to your 401k, I always advise people, don't try to check it on a day-to-day basis. When you still zoom out and look at the last 4 or 5 years of gains, it's still looking pretty all right. But of course, if you are a day trader, you get a little bit of a stomach churn from what we've been seeing as of late. But again, with these tariffs ratcheting up even further, this is likely just the beginning of some of that volatility.
You a big coupon guy, Brian?
I do like couponing. I mean, no one really cuts them out anymore.
Yeah, I know.
It's all
I remember
digital,
my mom had a
takes
folder.
the fun out of it, in my opinion. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
Well, consumers and businesses in the U.S. stand to pay a price for President Trump's tariffs on America's top 3 trading partners. Nearly everything the U.S. imports from those 3 nations is subject to tariffs of at least 20% in the case of China and 25% for Mexico and Canada. So that includes food items, as Mexico and Canada supply a significant share of several key food categories. Electronics, toys, and appliances will also likely be impacted because China is a major supplier of those products to the U.S. Cars and car parts could also become costlier and harder to find. That's because vehicles sold in America are no longer purely American made. Retailers are also warning about the impact of tariffs. Target says it expects sales to only grow around 1% this year, adding tariff uncertainty will impact profit this quarter. Walmart, which is America's largest retailer, also recently warned this would be a rocky year for them.